Hey there, and welcome back to Help My Business is Growing, a podcast where we explore how to grow and build a business that is healthy and sustainable. I'm your host, Kathy Svetina. And look at that, we've made it to the 10th episode. And to celebrate this, I've decided that for the next 3 episodes, we are going to do something different. And as I was recording this episode, and the next two, it dawned on me that they are very closely related. They're all about productivity, but look at it from different angles and from different perspective. So I thought it would be a great idea to actually treat these 3 episodes as a sort of a trilogy. In this one, my guest is going to be Don O'Connor, and we're going to explore how being productive and working are actually two different things. And what are some of the specific tools that you can implement in your work that will actually make you productive, not just busy? The next episode, episode 11, we're going to be diving more into this idea of busyness and how to cultivate a culture in your business that focuses on not just getting the stuff done, but getting the right stuff done. Episode 12, which is the last one in this trilogy, will dive into the topic of how to do more by actually doing less. And I'm sure you've heard about this concept before, and it's very easy to say, but it is extremely hard to do, especially when you have a growing business. All 3 of these episodes are filled with actionable advice from 3 different experts in their fields, and they're designed so that you can start immediately implementing the teaching so that get you closer to a place in your business that you want to be at. Before we go into this first episode of the trilogy, I want to tell you a little bit about my guest, Don O'Connor. Dawn is a productivity trainer and process consultant. She is deeply curious about how people work. She employs a strengths-based approach to help her clients simplify workflows and tap into their productivity superpowers. In her 30-year career, Dawn has trained and coached over 10,000 people locally and internationally to help them get organized, save time, reduce stress, and enjoy playful, productive momentum. In response to her clients' needs during the early days of the pandemic, she also introduced a new service called the Focus Bubbles, which are hosted virtual co-working sessions that provide community connection and accountability. The demand was so great that she actually launched it as a new business in January of 2021. All of Dawn's workshops and consulting engagements are based on current research, extensive experience, and learnings from real-life client scenarios. The teachings are always practical, applicable, and often fun. Join me. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited that you're here. So working and being productive are 2 different things. And there's so many tips and tricks about how to be productive these days. And we have the technology that keeps us automate the tasks with the intention that it's going to free up our time, right? Especially in the last year that we're working longer hours and struggle with ending the workday. And since you're the productivity expert, I'd like to hear your take on it. Why do you think that's happening?
With everyone changing their habits about how they work, right? Being sent home and having to figure out a whole new routine, the specific mention that you just made about ending the workday is a really important one because we don't have the same cues in our day, the same rituals of shutting down our desk and running to catch a bus or a subway or wherever you are, L train, whatever it looks like. And so because we're missing those cues, we just often keep working. And then the demands, what happens is a self-perpetuating cycle where you're emailing past 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. People are now responding. Say you're the boss and you're asking a question, and then your staff feels responsible to answer that question at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And it just keeps creeping, right? It's like a scope creep, except for our own work. And so to establish some really simple rituals for the end of your day, some closure tactics, even planning for the next day, or if you are at home, creating a fake commute, go for a walk. I have a little cabin in my backyard that I used to work in, but my husband stole it during COVID. So just like literally the 6-foot walk from the cabin to the house was like, okay, there's my commute. I'm leaving work behind in that physical space.
That's so important. And something that I've seen with myself too, it's because, both of my husbands and my office are in the house right now. And luckily, we're lucky enough that we have 2 separate spaces. So we don't have to share the space with the rest of the household or with each other, because that would not be good for a marriage. But I've seen it that it's really hard to end the workday because the space that you work, it's in the same space when you're doing everything else. You have family time, you have time with your husband or wife. I mean, it's really, really hard. And what works for me now, and this is going to sound crazy, but after I'm done, I take a shower, kind of
I
just
love
washes
that.
off the day.
That's a fantastic one for so many reasons. When I ask clients, and I've asked this to probably more than 10,000 people, where do you get your best ideas? The number one answer is in the shower. And so there's this, it gives our prefrontal cortex a chance to just relax and then new ideas pop up. And so to do that at the end of the day is brilliant. Now I want to copy you. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and you're right. That's where my best ideas come from. When I'm in the shower or I'm out taking a walk out in the neighborhood, there's something about being in nature that really nurtures that idea, neurons in your brain. Do you have any like, scientific explanation? Why does that happen?
I'm not going to explain it properly, but I will refer to the person everyone should listen to is Dr. Andrew Huberman, and he does a whole podcast on this specific issue. But there's sort of this magic ability of light in our eyeballs to stimulate our productivity and to keep us alert. And so just stepping outside in nature and having light hit our eyes. It's important to like be looking at the light, not head down on a phone, but actually get that exposure. And the other thing that's odd, and he calls it forward ambulation, but it's walking. Walking forward is actually really an important thing to do relatively early in the day. There's a bit of a magic formula about 2 hours after your lowest body temperature point in the night when we wake up to get outside and get that exposure is for maximum impact. He calls that a productivity protocol. So I'm just actually learning the depths of this science, but it's really simple. It sounds complicated. Get up, move, get light, and eventually have something to eat, but not first thing.
And going into the multitasking that I know you're very much, and I actually agree with this, that we as human beings, we just cannot multitask. We cannot keep our different tabs open. And you are such a big proponent of deep focused work and the company that you have, and you just started the service. I think it was during the pandemic, correct? The focus
Yes.
bubbles. Yep.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you more about this. And I know you're very specific about you don't want to focus bubbles infomercials, but I am such a huge fan of this because I recently started, I think it was about 2, 3 weeks ago when we started doing this. And I have seen in my own differences in my own productivities is because I'm able to be in these bubbles that you create for us and get things done. And I'm getting things done a lot faster. It's a lot more focused. So before we go into this, and I'm singing your praise with focus bubbles,
Thank you.
if you could explain to us what are the focus bubbles exactly?
Okay. And then I'll talk about multitasking because they are so closely aligned. So, a focus bubble is like very self explanatory in a way, in that it is you create this bubble for yourself by coming into basically it's a meeting to get your own work done. So, you think how good you are at scheduling meetings and honoring that time with other people in your calendar. This is a way to schedule time for yourself, a meeting for one, but with a group of other people who are showing up on a Zoom and making a simple declaration of this is what I'm going to work on. We do a little brain warm up at the beginning, no more than 5 minutes, and then we simply go on silent mode and we do our own work, which sounds like, yeah, who needs that? Like I can do that by myself. But again, there's a lot of brain science behind why it works. Once you've made that commitment public and you've stated what you're going to work on, you also feel like really crappy if you start cheating on yourself during the focus bubble with a whole huge potential audience, although nobody's really watching you. Maybe me, I peek sometimes. But basically, you've done two things. You've created a time defense. So you have blocked that time in your calendar. Now, other things cannot encroach into that time. It's a commitment. You're going to show up. You've paid for a service too. So it's like, think of it as the Peloton for work, personal trainer for work. And then number two, when you say what you're going to work on, then you've made a commitment publicly. So you'll work on it. And then even a third thing is we discourage, obviously, distractions. So making a conscious effort to close the tabs, turn off the alerts, get the phone out of your sight, all those little things, they're very tiny, but they can be incredibly impactful. And then behind all that is the science of mimicry. We see other people working hard and that spurs us on. If you think of when you go to the gym, it's motivating to see other people working out. You kind of, or you go to a class, you're more motivated to perform than if
Hmm.
you're working by yourself. And we release endorphins, because of the social aspect. We release dopamine from, which is a feel good thing that you get when you check a task off. So just that check mark, and you get this little burst of dopamine. I think there's also some serotonin and oxytocin thrown in there. I can't remember exactly why, but it really is this, it creates this like little magical scenario where you get great work done. And we do encourage deep work, but you can do whatever you want. Sometimes you just got to get those little admin tasks done. And anything you procrastinate on is great to plug into a bubble.
My experience with the bubble was that I get very distracted with things going on around my house. For example, right now we're just doing landscaping in our house, and my husband constantly keeps going into my office asking me things, opinions, what should be done. And it's really hard because when I sit down and I'm trying to focus, it takes me about 10 minutes to get into that flow, 10 to 15 minutes usually. And if someone comes and interrupts it, it takes me away again from that flow. And I constantly have to keep going back to it. And what I really noticed with the bubble, where it helped me, that I was easily able to say, no, this is not the time. I'm in my bubble. I am focusing. We're going to do this in about 30 minutes. It's interesting because there was nothing, I could have done that on my own before, but there was just something about being in a working environment with other people who are focusing as well that's giving my brain the signal, oh no, you have to stay focused.
And there's another piece in there, I think, with permissions. It's like you gave yourself permission to say no to an external thing because you made this commitment and it was blocked into your calendar. So it was just a tiny mindset shift. And I'm hearing that regularly from the bubblers. One gal says she puts a sign on her door that says, "Don't burst my bubble."
I love
And
that.
she's in an office setting and she happens to be a business partner with her husband, but there's, 20 or 30 staff around. And when they see that sign, they know, okay, she's locked in. We are not going to disturb her because if we burst her bubble, she'll be annoyed.
So, when you're running a company and you have employees, how do you cultivate these focus bubbles within your own company?
Yeah. It's so easy actually, and yet it's missing from these because I think we're still figuring out the whole hybrid and remote and blended approach. And so I've been teaching productivity for 30 years. And one thing I've regularly taught way before the pandemic is power hours, where your team collectively agrees to say Thursday from 2 to 3 o'clock, no internal email will be sent, no meetings will be scheduled, and we'll just have this time to work on things that we need to work on and have that deep focus time so that you're minimizing the internal interruptions, the internal to the organization, not internal to your head. That's a whole other different story. And I've had clients, very, very, very few out of the, say, 10,000, probably a small handful, who have successfully done this. Again, it's not hard.
Mhm.
The ones who have done it have, the results have been measurable and positive and they've sustained it. But I don't know why it's logistics basically is what it comes down to. And so Focus Bubbles like takes care of the logistics for companies. We have the platform, we have the scheduling tool, we also have the facilitators that make it happen. And I think that might be sort of a magical piece that's missing when you're coming together in a corporate setting. Somebody has to be responsible for sort of leading the charge and holding the space, and then you get distracted, you start talking about work, and it kind of dissolves or devolves, maybe is a better word. It just doesn't get honored quite in the same way as it does when you bring someone external in. But it is absolutely doable. Get someone inside the company, HR or a facilitator or a leader who really believes in it and can absolutely make it happen with no cost.
What I'm also hearing is it's very valuable to embed it in the culture as well. So it's easier, and we're talking about the corporations that they're big companies, but when you have a smaller company, especially if you're a founder, if you're a startup, and you are growing this company and you're growing your team, having these conversations and these expectations around work and how to do deep focus work and that you're actually allowed to, embedding that in a culture would be valuable from the start, right?
That's a brilliant point. And I'm thinking through my small business clients, and I know it's important to them, but it's everybody's in such a reactive mode typically that they're just not making that happen. They talk about it, but they're not truly honoring it and making it happen. And it can be as simple as a couple of touch points throughout the week. So, establishing that culture, I don't really have a lot of insight on how to create it initially, unfortunately, but I know how to sustain it. It's so It could be something as simple as in a team meeting, in a leadership meeting, you have 5 minutes dedicated to talking about how important deep work is, what is the impact, what are the outcomes, and how it's measured. Like I come back to the data. How do you measure the results of that? And really, we need to be focusing on outcomes of work, not how we do the work, but what do we produce? Not when do we do it, but what do we produce? Not where we do it, but what do we produce? And it's a big shift for some companies.
And I also see this in my own business. It's time management and then there's energy management. Because what I've noticed in my own productivity is that there's certain times of the day that I'm better at deep focus work. And there are other times of the day when I'm good at admin, like email or researching or whatever it might be. And I'm a night owl, so I seem to do a lot of my deep focus work more after hours, and I take that into consideration when I plan my day. So what is your take on this energy management and time management?
Well, yeah, I think you nailed it in terms of it's the alignment of your perceived energy. So when you have, the capacity to focus, you're not feeling fatigued. Every different kind of energy level we have can align with a certain kind of task. And we actually just put out a blog post last week on zombie tasks versus deep work. So deep work, we can define it as distraction free, concentration heavy, and in creating powerful outputs. It's the good meaty stuff that pushes your business forward, but we still have to do all the other admin low level tasks. And so when you get into that zombie state,
Mm-hmm.
you can feel yourself feeling fatigued. You're looking at your email and you're reading something 3 or 4 times. Start paying attention to those cues, or you're having trouble making a decision because you've hit decision fatigue. There's lots of little signs. Then have a list. Have a list of the zombie tasks, the easy things to tackle really quickly, making those hair appointment or whatever it is. You've got your list of tasks, and it might even be as simple as just doing a quick email scan and organizing and prioritizing things, but not actually doing a lot of the things. And so, yeah, just awareness of when your energy is at its peak. And we do go in about a 90-minute, it's called a little ultradian rhythm, a 90-minute cycle of where we have a peak at the top. And then at the bottom of that, when we're really feeling fatigued or restless or whatever, is to take an active break. It can be as short as a 3 minute. Just before this, I did a 3-minute Bollywood dance party
I love
to
that.
boost my energy. So, yeah, there's lots of very simple, quick things that you can do, and everyone has their little tricks and habits.
You mentioned zombie task. Would you say that a part of social media, social scrolling, just mindlessly scrolling, would that be one of the zombie tasks?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because there is actually some evidence that shows it's not a bad thing to have a little social break, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and laugh at the cat videos and have a little fun light interaction with your social media, but it does need to be limited because the risk is the rabbit holes, right? You go onto LinkedIn maybe like, "Oh, I just want to look up Kathy and see a little bit about her background," and then suddenly 20 minutes later you're in a whole other, you can't even remember why you got there in the first place. And so I like to restrict, I'd say 5 to 7 minutes as a break for social. Some clients will do like a 25-minute Pomodoro approach where they plug that into their day to both post their social and check their social. It all comes down to just awareness. Set a timer, get a sense, because people really don't usually have a good awareness of how much time they're spending on things. So just pay attention to it for a couple of days and it will reveal some interesting things, good and bad.
For myself, what I started doing, I started putting myself on a time lock on my phone, how many minutes I can actually spend on these social channels. The only problem that I have that I haven't figured out yet is I always give myself more time. So I don't know how much is working.
So do you like set a 10-minute timer on Instagram, for example? Like, what does that look like for you?
So I only use LinkedIn, and for my personal stuff, I only use Facebook. So I don't do Instagram or Twitter or any of the other ones. And I think for me, it's been very helpful to actually have no more than two social channels because then I'm not spending all the time. And I've been really trying to get to a point where I am dedicating no more than an hour to LinkedIn because LinkedIn is very important to my business
Yeah.
and actually structure that in my day, 30 minutes, 30 minutes. However, the problem is on the phone, when you're waiting for something and waiting for the water to boil or whatever it is, you're just mindlessly scrolling through. And before you know it, and I look at my breakdown of where have I spent the time in the apps, and I've spent 2 hours on LinkedIn over the day. I'm like, those are 2 hours I could be doing something else.
Yeah, I mean, you're ahead of the game having the awareness on it. That's fantastic. One tip on that is just device specification. So limit your social to a specific device. And ideally, maybe not your phone because it's so portable. And if it's only available on your computer, then that's where you're using it, right? Or on a tablet that I have actually many clients who have a tablet sort of separate from everything else and they do their social on that and they restrict it. So I personally haven't had that level of rigor around it, but I do like the idea.
I like that idea too. Love it. Maybe I'll start implementing that. And the other thing that I started implementing for myself now too, and this might be helpful to the listeners, is the whole idea of eating the frog. And I was wondering if you could, and we could talk about that. First of all, what is eating the frog, and how do you see that being helpful in the work that you're with the clients that you're doing, if they're implementing that, if that's something that's really helpful for their productivity?
Yeah, I love it. It's an oldie and a goodie, and it comes from Brian Tracy. He wrote a whole book on it, and it's just a brilliant, simple concept. Do the worst first, right? So if you have something that you're avoiding, do it first, and then what happens is, which sounds simple, but
Yeah.
we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. It generates momentum for the rest of the day. So it's like the frog is gross. Who wants to eat a frog in the morning? But if you get it over with, and then you're like, wow. What's fascinating to me is, and I've heard this repeatedly for the last 6 months inside the focus bubble, is when people say, I'm doing something today that I've been procrastinating on for ages. And then I check in with them at the end and they say, you know, it took 5 minutes or it took 12 minutes. And then I ask, how long or how much energy and time did you spend thinking about it and procrastinating on it? And it's just hours and hours and hours of that sort of negative energy that surrounds it and the self recrimination, like beating ourselves up because we did not get to that task. And we keep even like I've had clients. Oh, I have one client who's probably rewritten one task up to 42 times. She flipped the page, reread it, flip the page, rewrite it for months until she finally ate that frog. And so, step one, identify what your frogs are, just self awareness. Mine are invoicing, love to get paid, don't love to generate the invoices. So, whatever those are, spend a little time just acknowledging that that is a task you don't love. Find some ways maybe that you can make it enjoyable. Again, back to rituals, some good music, your favorite cup of tea, plug it into a bubble, whatever that looks like. Do it early in the day, get over that hurdle, and then the rest of your day you just feel like woohoo. So what are your frogs?
Oh.
Is it a list?
My frogs is, I think a lot of it is doing admin type of work, like rescheduling, scheduling, doing email,
Mm.
replying to emails. It's not that it's hard. It's just it takes time away from the things that I love doing. Like I love talking to people, I like looking at the numbers, and I'm not a good writer. So I think writing is really hard for me. And social media content, planning for the social media content. That's one of the things that I said, I need to be very deliberate about it so that I'm not, so that I already have the content that I'm putting out there, but you need to plan for it. And that's my frog. I have to put it in my week to actually plan it. And I haven't been able to successfully deliver on that promise to myself yet.
And then what does that do for your, like, how you feel about your productivity, your relationship to those tasks?
I usually, in terms of social media, I will just put it off and just won't get done until finally I'm like, oh, I haven't posted in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I need to do something. And it sparks the whole creativity, and then I go and do it. So it's mostly, it gets to a point when it bothers me too much that I have to go and do
Yep. Yeah, you're not
it.
alone.
I know.
You're not alone. And wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to wait until that we feel that undue pressure and we've kicked ourselves in the pants a couple of times for like not doing it. So build in eating the frog as much as you possibly can. And, you know, it's a term that really resonates when I do workshops. That is one that is consistently when I ask at the end, what are you going to do differently? What are you taking away? Eating the frog is a very popular one.
I actually had a conversation with someone recently, very recently, and he literally has toys of frogs on his desk. what he does is when he's eaten the frog, whether it's in the morning or in the afternoon, he takes the frog from one part of the table to the other part, making
Yeah.
sure it's a visual reminder. I have eaten the frog. I have done this, and he says that he feels so much better after that.
Yeah.
So I said, what I'm going to do, because I do not like frogs. I've actually gotten these like hideous looking frogs from Amazon. Just order them. I'm going to put them on my desk, and when I've eaten the frog, I'm going to give myself the allowance to hide them.
I love that. I have one client who actually found chocolate frogs, and she literally treated herself to the chocolate frog after she'd done the horrible task. So,
I love that. I love that idea even more. All right. So we talked about either the frog and the flow of energy management and the time management. And I'd also like to talk to you about, you talk a lot about this, the ADD process, the automate, delegate, and delete. And I would like you to get more deep into it. What is it and how it exactly does it look like?
yeah, and I really wish I knew who I could credit this to. I read about this approach many years ago, and I always like to credit sources, but I don't know where it came from. So ADD, and I added a couple of other Ds, DD. So automate, delegate, delete, defer, decline, or some other, like there's things you can add on to that. Really, it's about what I do with my clients is I sit down and we do a task inventory. So we gather what are all the potential things that you have to do to move your business forward, like absolutely everything, and find it in every source, every post-it note, every voice recording, all your task lists, all of the potential things. And then let's just run them through this little process. And you don't need help. Like you don't, you can all, everyone can do this on their own. Look at each task and decide what is automatable. First of all, what can you even create a little macro, what if process in your whatever toolkit you're using? What workflows can you automate inside your email newsletter campaigns? There's always little ways that you can take out the human component to make it a little bit easier using some technology or some apps. And then once you've exhausted that, you look at what can you delegate. And so if you don't have anyone to delegate to, perhaps there's an opportunity to hire a VA or somebody. There's often people are like, no, I have nobody I can delegate to. I cannot trust anybody. And then there's deeper issues there, but
Mhm.
we'll explore those. You know, just having a conversation with my clients on this, I often get pushback on the delegation. And when we really go through each task and examine it, I find between 10 and 30% of what's on their list is truly delegatable. And they have someone in their organization who is willing to do it. And there's often a perception of like, who would want to do that? And I need to do it because I know the stuff. But it's about taking the time to train and support and empower somebody else with the knowledge and the tools they need to do it. And that takes time. And so there's that resistance. So if you can get through that initial investment of time, then you'll have somebody that you can delegate to ongoingly, and it will save time in the long run. Delete, I'd say up to 10% of any tasks on my clients' lists are very low value, not contributing to, the true strategy and values of the business, and can be let go of or at least deferred, which is the next D. If they're not ready to like take it off their list, put it in a deferral, come back to it. It's a good idea, but we'll revisit it later. It's actually a very simple activity. You can do it in like an hour or two, and it uncovers some interesting things. Here, just a quick thing. I find that business owners, entrepreneurs, especially in scaling and taking all the responsibility on themselves, are really good. They're technicians, they know their industry, and they're good leaders, but they don't analyze how they do their work. And so just to step out of that, it's not what I'm working on. Let's look at the how of the systems that we work on, spend a couple of hours, and it can be really actually life changing.
Do you have any guidance of how do you go about doing that? How you look at how you're doing the work? What are some of the steps that someone would go through to figure that out?
Yeah, it's as simple as starting with a brain dump. And I start with actually something as this sophisticated tool of a post-it notepad, maybe bigger than this. I'm holding up a 1-inch one. And then one post-it for each task and keep it as micro as possible. Not a whole project, try and keep it specific with some action verbs. Write it, have these post-its, and then start to look at that as a whole comprehensive approach. Some people will immediately start to put those into categories of departments or areas of functional areas within their business. Some people will just split it business and personal, because you want to include your personal in there too, because we're always blending. And to separate them out is sort of doing a disservice to both, right? So look at the whole picture comprehensively. And then literally you just take each one and do some analysis on it. Can I automate this? Can I delegate this? Can I delete this? If you have a buddy that you can bounce this off, or another senior person in your organization, or your admin assistant, it really is tremendously helpful to have someone there asking you, challenging you on it, asking you some tough questions, and just listening and saying, well, here's another viewpoint on that. So doing it in isolation, I have to say, is a little bit difficulty, but if you can find a buddy to do it with, it's really powerful.
Yeah, and when it comes to delegation, that's where the systems and the processes pay off.
Yeah.
They are a huge investment in the upfront, but they pay off over and over and over again. Because when you have the SOP, the standard operating procedures in the business, you can easily go and delegate it to someone else. You can outsource it, you can give it to your assistant, you can hire other people, and you're essentially taking all the information that you had in your brain, you're putting it on this map, the checklist that people take, and they can replicate the work for you. You don't have to be involved in it. You're just the one essentially checking whether they have done it right or not.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of SOPs, checklists, basic processes. And you can look at any business and break it down to its essential processes, or processes, whatever accent you choose to have on that word. And it can feel complicated and overwhelming, but if you break your business down to, I look at it in three ways: sell it, do it, care for it. What does it take? What is in the sell it umbrella? And selling it is your marketing and your sales, and getting the product out the door. Do it is the delivery. So what are the services or products that you're delivering? Care for it is all the admin, the finance. Where your services would come in, Kathy, is like the what supports the business infrastructure. And so if you can keep it as that simple and high level as three broad categories, you might throw a fourth one is the creation. If you're like an inventor or you're creating a new product, you might have that up front. But essentially you can break any business down to those three components. And it just gives you these easy buckets to slot things into and then figure stuff out.
I love that. It's a lot easier to think about it when you think about it in buckets, where you are in the buckets, what are some of the things that you're doing in there, and what you can either get rid of or you can delegate, and just move on to something that it's going to bring you either more money or it's going to bring you more joy. You can spend time with your family, you can spend time with your kids, and it's I think the business is a lot more joyful to work in as well, because you didn't start a business to be doing all of these and more. You started because you really, really like what you're doing and you want to bring value to the world and you want to enjoy your life, right?
And that's a really good point. When you're doing the ADD activity, a big question to ask is, what is the value add of this particular task? And look at, how does it impact your client and the joy that you get in the process of doing that task, right? So sometimes there's stuff that we just don't love to do, but someone in our organization sometimes loves to do things that we don't, and you can find those handoffs. But ultimately, the value add to the client. How does it impact the client? Is this serving us, or is it costing us?
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to switch gear to this thing called the batch processing. And I would like you to speak a little bit more what exactly it is and how can we use that in our productivity.
It's kind of like the opposite of the multitasking we were referring to before. So, taking a series of tasks that are similar, that your brain can process in a similar way. So, if you think of the left brain, right brain, if you're wanting to deep dive and do high value deep work, pick all of your creative tasks that are somewhat related. Actually, I'm going to pick a different example, because the common ones are more the administrative type of tasks to batch process. So if you have a series of phone calls to make, and they're not fixed in time, they're not appointments, but you have to reach out and touch base with 5 or 6 clients, batch process those. Put those into a 1 hour time frame, or whatever you think it's going to take. Have your list of client 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the phone numbers, and your speaking points. So, what is the main agenda point for each one? And once you do the first phone call, and a lot of people have a fair bit of, it's fascinating to me how resistant we are these days to picking up a physical phone and
Yeah.
just, and kind of feels like you're intruding. There's a funny thing about phone calls, but once you've done the first one, and if someone actually answers and you have a conversation, then your brain is in this mode and you get into a flow. So then the second one is easier, the third one, fourth one, whatever. So we want to be doing similar tasks, so that we can get into flow. And you had mentioned something before when you were in the bubble and your husband came to ask you a question. He was interrupting your flow and pulling you away. And so every time we're pulled away from something, which is either internal distraction or external, and we start multitasking, there's that startup cost. So you mentioned that it could take you 10 minutes to get back into that task. When we batch process, we sort of eliminate, we have an upfront startup cost, investment, and let's say spreadsheet analysis, right? So you got to get those spreadsheets open, figure out what it is that you're doing with those. That takes a little brain power, sometimes a little organizational stuff. And so if you can do similar tasks along those lines, other spreadsheet related things, number crunching, your brain is like, yeah, just getting warmed up after the first little bit, and then try and stay in that so that you don't get pulled away and have another startup cost. Our brains love to batch process naturally.
Yeah, and one thing that I've noticed with myself is when I have to switch, the hardest thing for me is to switch between spreadsheet works and actual creative stuff like
Mhm.
content creation. Because these are, I feel like these are two different processes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Your brain has to function a little bit differently for each one. And so if you can set aside a couple hours of time to do your writing and your social and not have to go back to the spreadsheet world, your brain will be very happy with that. I mean, it's a fairly simple concept. And if you look at your day, you just, have a glance at your calendar and think about how split up our day often is with a meeting and then a little bit of work and then another meeting. If we could, first of all, going back to energy alignment, understand whether we're introverted, extroverted, where our energy falls. If you are, say, high energy in the morning, then keep that morning free for deep work. Don't plug meetings into that. Use that energy, harness it, eat the frog. All of the things will come together. Come to a focus bubble, eat the frog, get all your good work done in the morning. And then in the afternoon, you could batch 3 meetings in a row, with a little bit of time in between to process and do the follow up notes. But we generally, I mean, I look at people's calendars every day and they're so chopped up that it's not serving them. So if you have freedom and flexibility and autonomy to actually control your meeting schedule, and these days so many people have a Calendly or a Acuity or whatever, so block that time so that other people aren't blocking it in for you, and batch process your meetings so that you have your deep work in another batch.
Is this where time blocking would come really handy as well? So you can batch process those specific tasks into that particular time block. So you could say every Tuesday between 3 and 6, I am doing deep focus client work, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Easy answer. It's exactly what you need to do. People, I don't do it very well. I didn't do it very well. That's partly why I created focus bubbles, because I was very scattered, particularly during COVID, which is just out of my natural element. And so now I just have that peace of mind knowing that it's in my calendar every morning from 9 to 10, certain afternoons from what time to what time. I can just relax. I have that peace of mind knowing I'm going to just plug certain things into those time slots. And then I'm not holding them in my brain like an open loop. And so it has this, time blocking is a really effective technique. Cal Newport writes very well about it. So if you want to do a deep dive there, but it takes a fair bit of discipline. And I would say in my client base, about 30-40% do it well. It's not for everybody.
What do you think that some of the challenges are with time blocking when people go on that path? Are there like any particular mistakes that you see people making when you take that, then they take that particular productivity tool into?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So people get overzealous and super excited about it, and they block too much time in or too long of a block. So I hold 45 minutes to 90-minute maximum is a nice starting place. Once or twice a week is like, people just want to do, okay, I'm going to do this every day and I'm going to hold my time. And then they're getting, they're getting people annoyed at them because other people can't book meetings in, etc. So yeah, being overzealous is one issue. Or what happens most commonly, which ties in with that, is people book the time and then they don't honor it. And so again, you've got this, you're beating yourself up for something you committed to and then you didn't hold it. And so that doesn't feel good. And we want to celebrate our success, not beat ourselves up for not adhering to something that we promised to ourselves.
I would think that being realistic about it and knowing that you are going to have to schedule your lunch, your workout, your bathroom breaks, right? You cannot expect that you're going to be having an hour back to back of deep focus work or client meetings or whatever it might be, that there are going to have to be these little life breaks in between, right?
Yeah, white space. So that's what I refer to as white space. And you want to look at your calendar and see at least 30% white space to ensure some sanity. And I mean, you know how good it feels when you have a day where you don't have anything particularly scheduled, like no meetings, and how rare that is. But I get super excited when I see, like, I try and hold Fridays like that occasionally. And that just allows you that freedom to immerse into work and really do your deep dives. And if you can't, have that white space, then create the white space by booking, time to work on things instead of allowing meetings to take over your life.
And that's actually the time. And I take that time to think about new ideas about my business, think about new services that might offer, and just kind of let my creativity wander.
Yeah,
And I find that refreshing. I find that brings me energy. It is just joyful to have that white space.
absolutely. There's one gal in the bubble who plugs in creative daydreaming, is what she calls it. So she is sets aside, one bubble every couple of weeks, a 90-minute one, and with no tasks. Like she just, it's that space to hold. And then I can, I love peeking at her because she'll be dancing around, she'll have music going, and you can tell she's really just like having an experience where she's creating ideas. And I've had some people say, well, I can't force that. Well, we actually can. We can force that by creating the right atmosphere for ourselves and eliminating distractions. It's just that we're so reactive right now, or we're always, but it's worse. It's worse in the last year. Always checking news feeds, and there's a lot more pulling at our attention, and we're not giving ourselves that freedom and that white space to just relax, like your brain does in the shower or on a drive or on a walk.
Yeah, you don't have to be constantly on.
No.
You mentioned before about the differences of how introverts and extroverts work and how they're scheduling their day. And I wonder if you could give a little bit more context about how does it work for the two different types of people.
hmm So the fundamental definition, and there's also the ambivert in the middle, and Dan Pink writes about that really nicely. But really, the fundamental definition is, where do you draw your energy? So it's not whether you're shy or reserved, or it's just like, where do you draw your energy? If it's from people, then you're an extrovert. It's from being alone and having quiet time, you're an introvert. And so I think of my introverted clients, and when we're designing their day, we're keeping that introversion in mind in terms of, if they need to draw energy for their work, they're going to avoid meetings in that time frame. It's just a consciousness, an awareness of, how is that going to make you feel to do deep work or to have to deal with people, and then think of the consequences. So just being self-aware. I would say read the book Quiet if you're an introvert, and it's life-changing, by Susan Cain.
I've actually started experimenting with this myself as well because I noticed being an introvert, even though I love interacting with people, I know that if I have a couple of back to back meetings, this is going to deplete me. And it's not a good time to jump right into deep work, spreadsheet work, something that really takes a lot of mental energy because I just don't have much left. And you've given us so many ideas of how to schedule our day, how to find joy in our day. And when someone's trying to implement this in their business, in their workflow, in their productivity, what do you think would be the best next tangible step that someone can take back to their business, something that they can do over the next week to be really more productive and more focused on what they're doing?
Well, my answer to everything right now is focus bubbles. But if not that, this is not a sexy answer, and this is not what people want to hear, but doing a time tracking activity, like it's all about self-awareness and truly acknowledging where your time goes, because you can't improve, you can't fix. Basically, you can't fix a process unless you've analyzed it and you know what the as is state is. So you need to know your as is state. It can be as simple as writing it down, use a free app called Clockify. There's a bunch of free tools out there. Nobody likes this activity and wants to do it, but it is an amazing eye opener to see where you're spending your time. And then once you know like you said, Kathy, with your social, once you know that it may be expanded from 1 hour to 2 hours, it makes it a lot easier to tackle that. So self-awareness first. Here's a simple one. If that seems overwhelming, do this. Post-it note again. Anytime you're multitasking, put a little tick, creating the little fence posts. So anytime you sense or you feel you're multitasking, put a tick. By the end of the day, see how many little fences you've built. And that will be a little cue for you that you might be multitasking more than is healthy.
That's really helpful. Thank you for that. I'm going to start doing that on my own too.
It's scary.
Yeah. I just hope I stay on one post-it note. I don't have to start another one.
Start with a really tiny one. But then I have people who are writing. One guy said to me, he called me after a couple of weeks. He's like, I did really, really, really tiny fence posts. He had a whole post-it note like covered in them. It was very cute.
Dawn, where can our listeners get in touch with you?
Dawn at dawnoconnor.ca, or the easiest thing is focusbubbles.com. So focus, Focus, bubbles with an S.com.
Great. Thank you so much for being on the show, Dawn.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode with Dawn. She gave us so many great tools and resources on how to increase the productivity and do it in a way that works for you and for your style of work. As a reminder, this episode comes with timestamps to topics we discussed, and it has its own blog post as well. You can find all of these timestamps, the links to the blog, the books and resources that Dawn mentioned, including the link to her website on the show notes of this episode. And also, this episode is a part of the trilogy, so make sure to tune in to the episode 11, the next episode, where we're going to be diving into this idea of busyness and how to cultivate a culture in your business that focuses on not just getting the stuff done, but getting the right stuff done. And one last thing before I go, I do have a favor to ask. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, if you could please go to the show and tap the number of stars that you think the show deserves, because it helps other people find it and it helps other entrepreneurs as well. Thanks so much. Until next time.